One. We have all of our jurors present, along with Mr. Durst. Mr. Durst has his lawyers present. Mr. Lewin and the prosecuting attorneys all are present. You may resume your opening statement.
On September 30th, 2011, Morris Black died. He died, the evidence will show, in a struggle with Bob Durst over a gun. Bob Durst was defending himself. They fell, and as they fell, the gun went off. Now, I understand that Mr. Lewin ridicules it, saying that a gun doesn't go off by itself. But this was a target pistol with a hair trigger, and Morris Black had it in his hand, and Bob Durst's hand was over Morris Black's hand, not on the trigger. The evidence will show that. Here's a reconstruction, understanding that this came from our trial in Galveston, or at the time of the trial in Galveston. And the technology has advanced quite a bit since this was done. Now, what you see is the interior of Bob Durst's cheap apartment, and you see a table with a yellow jacket of some kind on it, and you see Morris Black seated at the table when Bob arrives. You will see Bob come in, go directly to where he had hidden the gun from Morris Black, and find that it's not there. Morris Black wasn't supposed to be there. Bob had kicked him out. But Bob came back to the apartment from a jog that he'd taken from the synagogue, which was about 1.5 miles away. And as he got there, he heard the TV and knew that Morris Black must have gotten back into the apartment. And he was concerned about the gun. So as the door opens and Bob goes to look for the gun, Morris Black comes up with the gun and starts to point it toward Bob, and Bob grabs it and wrestles with him, and they fall to the ground. As Bob comes in, he's going now to where he had hidden the gun in the oven, and it's not there. So he turns around and confronts Morris as Morris comes up with the gun. They struggle. They fall to the ground, and the gun goes off, and it hits Morris Black and the bridge of his nose. When the bullet strikes Morris Black, you will hear evidence that it's common for there to be blowback or blood spatter. And that means when the bullet hits a human being, it hits a subject, blood will recoil back out in a pattern. And there are people who consider themselves experts. The prosecution will call one of them named Tom Bevel, who will testify that from the pattern of the blood splatter, and you can tell whether it's high velocity or low velocity or at an angle or so forth. But here's what the undisputed evidence will show about the pattern. As the blood splatter hits, it comes back and hits the wall of the kitchen. This diagram describes the pattern of the blood. You'll notice that the pattern is an oval. I believe the testimony from the expert will come, and it's common sense, that when the blood splatter comes out from a small point, it goes out in a cone. Those of you who've had solid geometry know that a cone is basically a circle that gets increasingly wider as it leaves the origin. If you dissect that cone straight across, you have a circle. But if whatever dissects that cone goes at an angle across the cone, it will describe an oval. The wall is the dissection of that cone of blood. The wall cuts across that cone at an angle, and thus the oval on the wall describes where that bullet hit the body and the origin of the blood splatter. It's all technical. It's also common sense. We believe the evidence will show that it's consistent with what Bob will tell you was their struggle and falling on the floor of the kitchen and the gun going off. Bob will tell you that he panicked. He did not have his cell phone. He left it in the car. This is a early 90s, 2001, after September 11, 2001. And cell phones were not as easily portable 20 years ago as they are today. He had no phone in the apartment. Morris had no phone. So he ran outside. He ran to the corner by a hamburger joint called Charlie's Hamburger Joint. There was a, excuse me, there was a payphone. There was a woman on the payphone. He ran up to the payphone and asked the woman to get off. She wouldn't. Her boyfriend started to menace him, so he left and knocked on doors in the two houses between there and where he was, where his apartment was. Nobody answered. So he went back inside, and Morris was there on the floor in a pool of blood, dead. Bob panicked because he knew that he had rented that house disguised as a mute woman. He knew that Janine Pirro had threatened him, not directly, but with a renewed investigation. It was his house, his gun, and he thought the police would never believe him. So he sat on his bed and tried to decide what to do. He drank some Jack Daniels. He smoked some dope. Bob smoked dope almost every day. And so he decided that he had to move the body and dispose of it. By the time he made that decision, rigor mortis had set in. The body was stiff. He couldn't move it. And so he decided to dismember the body. Awful. Awful. He will describe to you how he steeled himself against what had happened, and how he went to Chalmers Hardware to get a bow saw and a paring knife and garbage bags and a drop cloth, a painter's drop cloth. And he'll describe to you as if when he was dismembering the body, it was so horrible that it felt like to him he was seeing it happen. He was watching it happen, but he was not there. And he'll describe to you also how he took evidence, a bill from his optometrist in his name, a newspaper, part of a newspaper that didn't have his name but had the address on it. Lots of other evidence. And put it in the garbage bags with the body parts. The arms in one bag, each leg in a different bag. The body in a bag and in a suitcase. And the head in a bag with an axe. He went to Galveston Bay. Galveston Bay is one of the largest bays, inland bays, on the coast of Texas. It's miles across and miles long. There's an east bay, there's a west bay. He found a place in the dark, in a small neighborhood, on a concrete pier that went out into the bay a few yards, and there he tossed the bags, all of them, believing that they would sink, believing that the water was deep. Galveston Bay, though, is very murky water. It looks kind of like a cup of coffee with cream in it. It's just, you can't see 2 inches into the water. And the water there was not deep. The evidence is the water was perhaps at the deepest spot in a couple of 100 yards would be up to your knees at high tide, and almost a mud flat at low tide. And so not only did the bags not sink, they floated. And Bob came back later and saw that they were floating. And so he went and cleaned out his apartment and threw everything that was left away in the garbage, including the gun. The gun will be in evidence, I'm sure it's here. It's a .22 Ruger semi-automatic, thick barrel, target pistol with a very sensitive trigger. And it has a peculiar, since it's a semi-automatic, it has a slide that comes back and ejects a shell. At the same time, it injects a shell. But it looks almost like a plunger. Bob threw that that gun and the clip that it had been in it and the empty cartridge and the extra clip that was fully loaded in the bags, along with other evidence of who he was. Clues. There was blood in the apartment still. There was DNA that the police found. There was blood in his car from the bags as they leaked when he put them in his car. There was clues everywhere, hundreds of clues. significantly different from whoever killed Susan Berman. Significantly different from the disappearance without a trace of Kathy Durst. Well, of course, it was to be discovered. The next day, a man with his son were fishing on that pier, and they saw a picture. They saw what you'll see in pictures as what first looked like a pig in the water, but turned out to be the torso. The pictures are awful. The testimony of the medical examiner that examined the body was, in essence, there's no injury on the body that could be the cause of death, and clearly the dismemberment occurred after death, but there was no head. The medical examiner said there was aspiration of blood into the lungs. So Morris Black lived briefly after being shot in the head, but it indicated that there was damage to the head and the nasal cavity. Otherwise, the aspiration of blood would not have gone in the lungs. And the medical examiner will also testify that the bones that were cut across the bones, not at the joints. An amateurish, panicked way of dismembering a body. And of course, the police carefully examined the contents of all the bags that they found. They found one bag significantly, or there were multiple bags. Each one was double or triple bagged. But they found one bag that was empty. It had blood in it, but it had a large slit at the bottom. We believe the evidence will be persuasive that that's the bag that the head was in, but it came out. And it was washed away by the tide. Nobody ever found the head. But they did find the gun, and they did find the empty cartridge, and they did find 2 clips, the magazines for the gun, one with one less bullet than capacity. And the evidence is persuasive that there was one shot. And Bob will tell you that it happened as he struggled with Morris Black for his life, and they fell to the ground. And the physical evidence supports it. That's a close-up of that diagram. Bob was arrested. He ran. He ran to New Orleans, where he had again rented a rundown apartment, dressed as a mute woman. But this was New Orleans. And the landlord there busted him right away. The landlord there had seen men dressed as women, but it didn't matter to him. Bob ran to that apartment. He stayed there for a few days and then remembered that he had a pair of glasses waiting for him at the optometrist. He doesn't make very good decisions.
here.
Yes. By the time he came back to pick up his glasses, the police had found the receipt from the optometrist. And they'd gone to the optometrist and said, on the slight chance that Bob Durst, by the way, the receipt was in the name of Bob Durst because he was by then living as Bob Durst. If this guy comes back, call us. And he did. He came back. Still, nobody in Galveston knew who Bob Durst was. The police didn't know who Bob Durst was. It was just Bob Durst. And so he came to pick up the glasses. The girl behind the counter called the police. They stopped him and arrested him. Here's a picture of Bob on the day of his arrest. The police took lots of pictures. This was one that they took of Bob's hands. And here's a close-up. Of Bob's right thumb. I want you to notice, because the evidence, the picture shows, on his right thumb, in the web, close to the web between his thumb and forefinger, is what's a resolving blood blister. What this evidence shows is that Bob's finger was not on the trigger. His hand was on Morris Black's hand.
That's an argument. You're drawing a conclusion from evidence. You must not argue but you may present the blister and ask the jury to pay attention to it. You can argue later.
Pay attention to it. We'll argue it later. But that's a resolving blood blister. Everybody's had a blood blister, I think.
Still sounds like argument.
Yeah, don't argue, please.
All right.
Lawyers can't help it. Stop.
Whoever killed Susan Berman left no clues. Kathy Durst disappeared without a trace. After Morris Black's death, the police found hundreds of clues. On November the 11th, 2003, a jury that looked a lot like you, people from all walks of life, 12 people found Bob Durst not guilty. After that, Bob pled guilty to charges that arose from dismembering the body and disposing of the body and from jumping bond, which he did right after he was arrested. He jumped bond. He traveled from Galveston up to the East Coast and was arrested in early November. Of 2001, shoplifting a chicken salad sandwich and a Wall Street Journal and a Band-Aid, because when he shaved his hair and eyebrows, he had nicked himself and needed a Band-Aid. The police arrested him. They put him in custody. And he was taken back to Galveston. After the jury found him not guilty, he owned up to destroying evidence, in other words, the body, and to bond jumping. And he served some more time. They took him up to Pennsylvania and filed gun charges on him up there in federal court. He served a little more time in federal court. He came back to Houston, where he has lived ever since. He's had other homes, but right now his home is in Houston, Texas. And that would have been the end of the story. But Bob wanted his story out. He wanted to explain himself, because everywhere he went, he got stares, and people would look out of the corner of their eyes on him. And he wanted the people, the public, to know that he wasn't the Bob Durst everybody thought he was. That he'd had a rough life. That he'd been hounded all his life. The problem is that he chose the wrong people to tell that story. Andrew Jarecki and his crew had made a movie called All Good Things. It was named All Good Things after the health food store that Bob and Kathy had in Vermont, where they were happy. And it was a movie. Took a lot of imagination. Bob liked the way that Seymour Durst was portrayed in it, because Seymour was portrayed as an overbearing, mean father. And he thought that he would get an honest depiction of his story. And so Andrew Jarecki and his crew started interviewing Bob. Bob cooperated with them completely. And the result was the series, The Jinx. Now, some people call it a documentary. It's not a documentary. It doesn't pretend to be a documentary, but it's called one. It was a series of programs that ran in early 2015. By the time of the fifth segment, there were 6 segments. By the time of the fifth segment, it became obvious to Bob that this was a hatchet job. That it wasn't his story as he wanted it told. It was a heavily edited story to make good entertainment. And in fact, it won an Emmy. But after the 5th segment, Bob again panicked. He left his apartment in Houston. He had a gun with him. He had a mask with him. He had a fake ID with him. And he drove to New Orleans and rented a hotel room so he could watch the 6th segment, which was the one where they had the heavily edited bathroom tape, where Bob said, "Kill them all," of course. What the evidence will show is that Bob finally realized what Jarecki and his crew were trying to show, that he killed them all. He knew he'd been fooled. and he panicked, and he ran. But again, Bob and his Asperger's, he doesn't make good decisions. And so although he was in New Orleans, he threw his cell phone out so he couldn't be traced on the way over there. He called back into his answering service to get his messages. And of course, the LA district attorney or the LAPD had trap and trace and warrants on his phone, and as soon as he did that, they were able to trace where the call came from, that it came from the hotel in New Orleans. 2 FBI agents showed up. They arrested him, searched his room, found money, guns, dope. He called right away, as soon as he could, to his lawyers.
Now that's going to call for hearsay with no.
He's going to testify about it.
Doesn't matter. It's an out-of-court statement.
This is overruled. Continue, please, and pull up your mask, please.
If you're on court saying it's not.
I'm just overruling your objection right now. Mr. DeGuerin thinks that this is what the evidence is going to show. Go ahead.
Before his lawyers could get there, Mr. Lewin and his crew got there and started questioning him at early in the morning.
Your Honor, that is an inappropriate argument. There is an inference in that statement that there's something inappropriate. Mr. DeGuerin is well aware that the court has made numerous rulings that that was a completely wrong. I'm not going to let it stand. I'm not going to let it stand.
All right, but I'm not going to allow speaking objections, Mr. Lewin. Thank you very much. Your objection, though, is sustained, and that is that you are venturing into the world of argument. But you may present the facts, present the evidence that you expect to present.
I expect the evidence to show that Mr. Lewin interrogated.
Your Honor, I would ask the court to
May I stop, Mom?
please instruct the jury that objection was sustained about that comment. That is a comment that cannot just sit out there.
All right, Mr. Lewin, please. Ladies and gentlemen, disregard any argument that you heard. You will be the judges of the facts. As far as any statements that are made, you may examine the entire circumstance under which the statement is given to determine whether it's true and reliable. I'll instruct you very specifically about statements from a defendant and how to consider those statements. I won't allow argument at this time about that. You may describe the situation, but be careful, Mr. DeGuerin.
Well, the evidence will be clear that Bob Durst's lawyers were not in that interview. The evidence will be clear that it was Mr. Lewin and a couple of detectives that took him out of his cell early in the morning in one of the worst prisons in the country and interrogated him for almost 3 hours. The prosecution says that's a confession. You'll see how Bob Durst was playing Mr. Lewin. It wasn't a confession. The evidence will be that there's no evidence. Went past a couple of slides here. He got the interviews for the Jinx. He had his final interview for the Jinx 3 years later. After sharing some of their information with the LA DA's office, they began airing the Jinx on March 14th, the day before the final airing of the Jinx, of the last segment. Bob was arrested. And beginning at 6 o'clock in the morning in the New Orleans Parish Prison. Mr. Lewin interrogated Bob for 2 hours and 47 minutes. The only case before you to determine a verdict is the murder of Susan Berman. The evidence is lacking. The evidence isn't there. Bob Durst did not kill Susan Berman, and he doesn't know who did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeGuerin. Now, before we break for lunch, I will share with you my investigation of the dining situation. Yeah, you're raising your, you can't hear me. This is it. Here, wait, let me try this microphone. Oh, a working microphone, cool. The microphone that I had before went to this little recorder for the traffic trials that they did in here. I'm talking to it and I'm pressing the buttons and I still you couldn't hear me. It was turned off. I'm recorded for the next traffic court though. All right, this is, so I do not recommend restaurants. The court cannot recommend any business, right? That would not be ethical for me to lend my recommendation to a business. It's not allowed. But I'm interested in eating, and you are too. So I haven't been to these places, but I drove down Manchester. So these are driving range if you're driving. So if you drive down Manchester, within 2 minutes, you encounter a Subway and a Carl's. Then there is Canton Kitchen, Chinese presumably, and a Charlie's Restaurant. Then within 3 minutes, and then La Michoacan, sounds autentico. Next, within 3 minutes is Bravo Charburger, Maria Taco, Jamba Juice, which if you like Jamba Juice, that's pretty good. And then there's Roscoe's House of Chicken and Waffles if you're into health food. Yeah, I don't know how fast they are. It seems really, really popular, and you might not be able to get back here in time. Also, there is the problem of eating a big lunch, because that you might tend to doze off into pleasant sleep when you ought to be paying attention to the witnesses. So don't eat a big lunch. And if you go just a little bit further, of course, Randy's Famous Donuts. Not really a good lunch choice, but I didn't know if it was open, but it's still there. Now, if you get on the 405, I timed it, it was 9 minutes to Westfield Pavilion. All in the dining court, there's all kinds of choices there. I did go there. And also, I have not been to Howard Hughes for a long time, not since before the pandemic, but as I recall, there were restaurants there also. There was not as many as Westfield. So we need to be back by 1:30, so keep that in mind. It may be healthier to bring your lunch and dine out here on the plaza. That's up to you, of course. But I did want to let you know that what I had found. So, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to seeing you at 1:30 p.m. when we will begin the evidence in this case, or resume the evidence, because you've already heard some. When we resume the evidence, remember, do not talk about the case or about any of the people or any subject involved in it with anyone, including the other jurors. Do not make up your mind about the verdict or any issue until after you've discussed the case with the other jurors during deliberations. See you at 1:30.
You're muted.